Good morning. We're walking to work, which is something we don't normally do, oddly enough, in a hiking town. Everybody drives, believe it or not, for the most part. In any event, we are walking because we are going on a substantial trip on the AT in less than 3 weeks. Probably time to start getting the legs a little loose. So my very first backpacking trip ever was at a place called Isle Royale National Park. For those not familiar, it's Michigan's only national park. It's located in the northern section of Lake Superior, not far from Thunder Bay, Canada, and not far from where the Edmund Fitzgerald sank, actually. So you can only get there by seaplane or boat. Pretty cool place. In any event, this is probably the second night out of a 7-day trip. We were camped out at a place called Little Todd Harbor. Beautiful spot, right on the lake. I was with a church group. There was probably about, I don't know, 10 or 12 of us on this trip. So since this was my first trip, I kind of had a lot of borrowed gear. So my sleeping bag was this big, giant, cotton car camping bag. The thing must have weighed 8 pounds dry. You know, the kind that's a big rectangle that has like a hunting scene on the inside of it. Not designed for backpacking whatsoever, but I didn't have a sleeping bag. My dad lent me this one, and so that's what I had to use. So anyway, the night before it had rained a little bit, and cotton sleeping bag wicked up a little bit of the water from the side wall of the tent. So being the genius that I am, I'm like, well, I'm gonna go set this out near the lake on the rocks and let it dry out while we're having breakfast. Perfectly great idea. So we had breakfast. I walked back out to the rock to get my sleeping bag, and my sleeping bag wasn't there. And I'm thinking, well, did somebody steal it? Nobody's gonna steal this sleeping bag. And I looked down and the sleeping bag was under about 4 feet of water, just undulating under the waves. And it took 4 guys to get this thing out of the water. It was so heavy. This thing must have weighed well over 100 pounds, and I'm not even joking. Like I said, it took 4 guys to get this thing out of the water, and then we tried wringing it out, got as much of the water out as possible, and this thing still felt like a pallet of cinder blocks. So what happened then was everybody in the group sort of took some of my gear, because the only thing I could carry was that sleeping bag. It was that heavy. And of course, as soon as we're breaking camp and we get on trail, it starts to rain. And it didn't stop for the next 2 days. It rained nonstop. And that's pretty common when you're in a giant lake surrounded by water. On top of me not having a sleeping bag to use for the next 2 nights, my air mattress deflated. So I was basically sleeping with no sleeping bag and no air mattress on the bottom floor of a wet tent for 2 days. And it was pretty miserable. So a few days later, we got to a place called Chicken Bone Lake, and it was just like in the movies. The sky just sort of parted and these beams of sunshine just came down right on top of my sleeping bag. And we all sat there for a few hours and dried things out. I wasn't the only one with wet gear. It was like Christmas morning. So talked to my mom about this years later, and she's like, it's a wonder that you kept backpacking after that first experience. And you know, kind of thinking back on it, it is kind of strange. Isle Royale is a beautiful place, and despite the hardships that I had, I was still able to enjoy the trip and continue hiking and backpacking to this day. And I guess if there's something to be learned in all this, the moral of the story is, do not go backpacking with a cotton sleeping bag.